Well, we're into Tuesday now, the 18th day of February, 2025. A lot of you along and east of the Rockies waking up to scenes like this. Ice and snow-covered branches. If you're west of the divide, you're enjoying milder Pacific air. And we really have a huge contrast set up across the region today, and will really for the next 48 hours. The severe cold is expanding, oozing its way more south and east, but also oozing its way more west as the Arctic air mass is kind of like an amoeba. It's just kind of a blob coming out of south central Canada into the north central areas of the United States. And the Arctic blob of cold air has pushed up against the high plains and has gotten up to basically the foothills and mountains along the east-facing slopes of the Rockies, but it's not deep enough to get over the hill, like get over the hill from Cheyenne to Laramie, as you'll see here in a moment. Now, Pacific moisture will continue to funnel in today, tonight, tomorrow, into early Thursday morning. So there's going to be some more snow falling in the mountains, and then the Arctic air will be overrun by Pacific moisture. So there's going to be a patch of snow later today, and especially this evening and overnight, across the High Plains region, as the two air masses come together. This will cause additional accumulations of snow, hazardous travel with limited visibility, icy roads and highways, and in some areas, single digits and sub-zero temperatures. The Arctic air begins to shift east, more towards the Great Lakes, into the middle part of the U.S., and off the slopes of the Rockies. So it'll be not a rapid retreat, but by Thursday and Friday, on the western edges of this Arctic air, you'll start to feel temperatures moderate as the Pacific comes in. And as we get into the weekend, as we get into next week, the Pacific takes over, really across the country, bringing a big warm-up. We talked about this yesterday. There'll be a big rebound. The Arctic air will retreat, and you're going to get a break. Even for you folks in Montana, North Dakota, the northern half of Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, the upper Midwest, southern Canada, where you guys have just been in the deep freeze for weeks, you're finally going to get a break, all areas, with this shift. And the shift in the pattern is coming right around, well, early March. Believe it or not, March is coming up sooner than you think. And what we see in March is very March-like. And I'll show you here in a moment. Now, the Arctic air, as a lot of you have maybe noticed, if you're right on the boundary, and a lot of the boundary is basically the I-25 corridor from Wyoming down into Colorado, kind of along the I-90 corridor of western South Dakota, southern Montana, northern Wyoming, those interstates kind of where the Arctic air is really deep, like along and north of Interstate 90, and very thin along I-25. So here's an example of the Arctic front kind of playing tag with the Cheyenne area along I-25 yesterday. So you can see this time lapse from Jan Curtis of the Arctic air boundary kind of washing in, washing out, then coming back in again. It's like waves on a beach. And we had snow squalls develop right around the Arctic front yesterday. Now, to talk about local terrain features, what we call the Cheyenne Ridge, which is a high elevation ridge that goes west to east from west of Cheyenne along the Colorado-Wyoming border into far southwest areas of Nebraska, that higher terrain. A lot of times, the Arctic air will kind of get stuck there and stop there. We saw that yesterday, and right along that ridge line, we saw heavy snow squalls develop yesterday afternoon in a few areas. And we'll show you this terrain feature as it will play a prominent role tonight and tomorrow on who gets the snow. Southwest Colorado showing some fresh snow on the mountain peaks and more snow coming as that Pacific moisture comes in. And hey, taking advantage of the snow, we've got a mule and a horse taking advantage, saying, hey, I don't care about the snow. That's kind of cute there. And you can see a lot of obscured clouds from Mount Bros into Colorado. Then you get further west where the upslope has not come in along that Arctic boundary. And you've got the eagles out in a deep blue Wyoming sky there. And more pillars, sun pillars again showing up in the cold air, this time from the Craig, Colorado area. The satellite image this morning, kind of like yesterday, a plume of Pacific moisture, and then the Arctic air, which is a little bit hard to see, really showing up right there. But like yesterday, we'll show you the satellite image that can see the cold on the ground, and you can see the farther extent south of the really, really, really cold air. That dark blue and that green there, those aren't necessarily clouds. Some of them are, but a lot of that is just extremely, extremely cold air. Minus 30s, minus 40s over Manitoba, Saskatchewan here. Look at these temperatures into North Dakota. Now, these were temperatures as of just before 3:30 a.m. So there's a good 3 hours, maybe a little bit more than 3 hours, where these temperatures are going to be getting colder in some of these locations. So these aren't even the overnight lows. This was just the current temperature readings in the middle of the night. And you can see the south extent, the cold air, you can see it pushing in from the northeast into Nebraska, northern Kansas here, and eastern areas of Colorado. And then along the mountain front, you can see the contrast. 2 degrees with fog and flurries in Cheyenne, but 25 in Laramie. So the terrain holding up the Arctic air. So you can see along Interstate 80 here, temperatures are in the 20s and the teens and the 30s in Salt Lake. That warmer Pacific air is pushing this way, but the Arctic air getting held up by the terrain. And you'll see this, especially when the Arctic air masses are really thin. So if you're along and east of this line, it's Arctic. Along and west of this line, it's Pacific. This morning and by tomorrow morning, this is where we're going to be by tomorrow morning. The center of the Arctic air is still here. So for today through Wednesday, the Arctic air will hold along and east of the mountains, along and east of I-25. Very deep there underneath the darker green colors here where the Arctic air really wants to hold tight. Another little Pacific wave is throwing moisture into the mix. By Thursday morning, you can see a fairly eastward shift there, pretty good eastward shift. So that cold air will head through the Great Lakes into the southeast and eastern areas of the U.S., where it will cause a lot of winter weather and a lot of problems. But the Arctic air gets released to the east. So that's when temperatures may start very cold Thursday, but will warm up considerably during the day. If we look at the temperature anomalies as of 5 p.m. today, you can see where the purple is. You can see the dark purple where the severe cold is going to be. By noon tomorrow, it shifts south, but it's still backed up. You see how it's still backed up along the I-25 corridor. Then by Thursday, it's more consolidated, at least the anomaly further south. The blob of cold here, notice it's still below average up here, but not 40, 50 degrees below average anymore. So things ease, and then you can see the orange here trying to push in along and west of the divide. Precipitation along where the boundary of the air is backed up against the mountains, the Pacific air overruns it, is still showing up. So light to moderate snows will be in this area right here where the deepest overrunning will take place. But you can see the mountain ranges will catch a little bit of Pacific moisture today, tonight, and tomorrow for a little more snow on the ski slopes. And later this week, we'll give you a snowpack update, but the snowpacks over the last week, especially in this area here, really got a big boost. When we take a look at the snowfall, you can see no one's getting clobbered here, but light to moderate snow amounts in the Arctic air will be found. Now you might notice this little stripe of brighter colors. What's going on here? I showed you that picture of the Cheyenne Ridge, that high terrain that is along southeastern Wyoming's border that goes east-west. And that can hold the Arctic boundary and make it a little bit deeper as the Arctic air kind of pushes up against that. Well, what we're seeing right here on the European model is something that we do see where the deeper Arctic air gets piled up against the higher terrain and it makes it deeper. The column vertically of the Arctic air is deeper in a bubble there. And that little bubble pushed up against the terrain causes the air from the Pacific to go up a little bit more. Right here, it goes up a little more. And that little bump in the higher terrain, it's not much, but it's enough to enhance the snow. So along the north side of the Cheyenne Ridge and the higher terrain from north of Cheyenne to north of Laramie here could have an enhancement of snowfall. So there could be a little bit heavier snow for northern Laramie County, southern Platte County, out here maybe southern areas of Goshen County as well. Then on the north side of the Snowy Range along, of course, Interstate 80 here. So this is something that we'll have to see if it comes together. It's been very consistent showing up in the data, and I think there's a real good chance a little narrow strip of heavier snow will occur right there. Lighter amounts that are going to be widespread and fairly uniform as you get out further east into the plains. By Saturday, well, the Arctic air really eases up across the northeastern United States. It's a west to east flow. It's Pacific. So the weekend into next week, we'll see moderating temperatures. And these are the temperature anomalies by Tuesday. Quite the opposite from what we're experiencing now. As we get into next week, we will have Pacific waves. There's a little bit of wave right here coming in Tuesday and Wednesday next week. But the waves are going to take a track along the U.S.-Canadian border and across the northern plains and northern Rockies in the Pacific Northwest. So we'll have a pretty big warm-up across the south as these systems, as the jet stream temporarily retreats to the north. But it's just a temporary retreat. Just kind of think of the weather in the northern hemisphere kind of taking a deep breath next week after what's going on right now. There's a deep breath, and then it exhales as we get into early March. So by March 2nd, we have a classic March pattern beginning to form. We're starting to get waves in the North Pacific spaced out with these ridges like this across the eastern Pacific, maybe a ridge building in the southeastern United States. So by the first weekend of March, we're starting to see storms come off the Pacific. And notice, we'll see what happens here, but I'm fairly confident this is a trend we're going to see in March, which is the storms are going to take further tracks to the south. That means more opportunities for upslope in this part of the world right here, which is what you need for decent amounts of precipitation. So we'll just have to watch and see. We're supported in the teleconnection. We showed you this teleconnection last week, the Pacific North America teleconnection. And when it goes into a negative phase, you tend to get more stormy in the west. So we go positive from where we are now. So this is when the warmer Pacific air pushes against the Arctic air, and this gives us our warming trend right here. This is the warming trend that takes us from late this week through most of next week. Not to say little waves won't come through, they will. But notice what happens right as we get into the first weekend of March. The mean of the PNA is negative throughout the whole period, and this is through the 4th of April. So with that into the negative phase, this pattern here will look a little bit more familiar. So we'll just wait and see what happens. Have yourself a good Tuesday. Stay warm.